So, dear friends, I would like to share with you certain life lessons we get from studying and reflecting on the life of Joseph. I'd like to talk to you on the God of Joseph. Now we read from the Bible, in the book of Genesis, that Joseph was the patriarch Jacob's favorite son. Jacob had 12 sons and one daughter, Dinah, but he loved Joseph the most. So like his father Isaac and his mother Rebekah, Jacob himself was guilty of favoritism when it came to treatment of his children. So we see God's servants shown in both black and white, with all their follies and imperfections. So in Genesis chapter 30, we read that when his favorite wife Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I will die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" And so later we read that Rachel gives birth to Joseph, which in Hebrew means, "May God increase." So Joseph was endowed with an extraordinary gift of interpreting dreams. Now this gift was given to him by God, and this gift took him places. Later we see that when his own brothers out of jealousy sold him as a slave to the Ishmaelites, who in turn sold him to the Egyptians, and then Joseph is seen as a God-fearing man, as a young boy, as a young teenager of about 17 years. He's seen as a God-fearing young man, even as a young adult. Much before the 10 Commandments was given, he refuses to commit a sexual sin with his master's wife. And later, he was falsely accused by her and thrown into prison. But he was patiently waiting for God to rescue him from the prison. And God kept his word. And we see in the book of Genesis that the Lord prospered the Egyptian, Joseph's Egyptian master Potiphar's household because of Joseph. We see that the Lord blessed Joseph and also made his master's household prosper. And Joseph was also given another special gift by God. Apart from interpretation of dreams, he had the gift of administration. And so when Pharaoh had a terrible dream in Genesis 41, Pharaoh's sorcerers and magicians could not interpret his dream, but Joseph does. And Pharaoh immediately promotes him to his right hand as the governor of Egypt. And we see Joseph's wisdom, special wisdom given by God, that saves not only his family, but also the Egyptians from the 7 years of famine. Now what we learn from all this is that Joseph, like his father Jacob, learned the fear of God from their fathers. As we read in Deuteronomy 6, the Lord telling the Israelites, the law was given 430 years later. Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, verse 6. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and you walk along the road. So I'm very sure that the patriarchs had taught their children and grandchildren knowledge of the one true living God and obedience to Him. We further read that Joseph's father had a tremendous influence on his spiritual life. We read how Jacob the deceiver was changed into a prince of God, Israel. And Jacob was wrestling with God, and he was filled with fear and distress because news came to him that his brother Esau, whom he had earlier cheated him of his birthright and blessings as the first son, was coming to meet him. And Jacob's spiritual life and the great transformation that God brought about in his life because of his faith is seen in his prayer before he met his brother Esau, which was the greatest life or existential crisis in his life. In Genesis chapter 32 verse 9 we read, "Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I'll make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan. But now I have become two groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau. For I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." And later we see the grasping Jacob becomes the generous Jacob. We see his overwhelming generosity to his elder brother Esau, when he gifts him with plenty of herds of cattle and flock of sheep. And then God tells him in Genesis chapter 35, when God said to Jacob, verse 1, "Go up to Bethel," which means the house of God, "and settle there, and build an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." So we see how Joseph would have been influenced by his father's deep faith in God and his spiritual life, and how the God of Israel was acting and directing in the life of his father as well as his grandfather. So we see again in the life of Joseph how Joseph invites his brothers and his father to Egypt during the famine, and how that wisdom God gave Joseph outsmarted the wisdom of even the Egyptians, who were then considered an ancient superpower among all lands. The same God who gave that wisdom to Joseph will give us that wisdom, which will elevate us to glorify Him. And then, when Jacob at first thought that he had lost his son Joseph forever, because, as I said, like his maternal uncle, his own 11 sons deceived him by saying that Joseph was dead, torn and killed by a wild animal, and showed him his coat of many colors, dipped in blood, dipped in the blood of a goat. And Jacob grieved for his favorite son Joseph all his life. And the Bible says life came back to him when he saw his son Joseph in Egypt. And the Bible says in Genesis chapter 47 verse 11, so Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land. And we also see the patriarch Jacob, the father of Joseph, blessing Pharaoh. When Pharaoh was interested in meeting him, Pharaoh asked him, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." And then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. And we also see Jacob blessing all his 12 sons and the two sons of his favorite son Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. So, St. Paul later says in the epistle to Romans that God's sovereign choice in his selection of Jacob over Esau and perpetuating the line by choosing Joseph out of his 12 brothers to save Israel, to keep Israel alive as a race and a generation during the famine in Egypt. That Romans chapter 9 verse 13, just as it is written, "Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated." What shall we say? And who are you, O man, to talk back to God? Shall what is formed say to him who formed it, "Why did you make this?" Or "Why did you make me like this?" Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay some pottery for noble purposes and some for common use? As God says, "I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whom I have compassion." This is what we learn from the lives of the patriarchs. That God is not a president or a prime minister or a mayor. That God is eternal and rules forever and makes his own choices in our lives. And his choices for us are always right. His choices of persons and directions. Thank you.